The auction was already halfway through when Rachel Madsen slipped into the back of the county courthouse. She clutched her purse tightly, fingers wrapped around the frayed strap like it was a lifeline. Her worn sneakers squeaked slightly on the old linoleum floor as she took a seat behind a group of elderly men in seed caps who didn't bother turning around. Outside, autumn had settled over Hope Hollow like a flannel blanket, cool and brittle, with a dry wind sweeping amber leaves along the parking lot. But inside the room, the air was heavy with heat and history. It smelled like dust, old paper, and the anxious sweat of people betting their futures on rusted tractors and half-collapsed barns. Rachel wasn't supposed to be here. She should have been asleep, recovering from another night managing the overnight shift at Fillmore's grocery. But here she was, sitting on a metal chair with $3,200 in cashier's checks in her purse. Her entire savings, plus a bit, she'd scraped together selling her wedding band, and a dusty collection of porcelain her mother had once said would gain value someday. It hadn't. The auctioneer's voice crackled like static as he rattled through lots, pointing vaguely at the projector screen. Next up, parcel 87B, Evergreen Hill Farm. 23 acres, bordering Pinewood Ridge, no reserve, no liens, structure on site, sold as is. Rachel's heart thudded. That was the one. Evergreen Hill. She didn't know why it had caught her eye. Maybe it was the way the flyer had gotten wedged under her windshield wiper a few nights ago, as if it had been placed there deliberately. Or the name, Evergreen Hill. It sounded like something out of a book she used to read when life still had edges she could believe in. But the thing was, Evergreen Hill had a reputation. She'd heard the stories. Everyone in Hope Hollow had. A family had once vanished from there or run off. Depending on who you asked, the place was either haunted or cursed. Abandoned since the early 90s. 20 years of silence on a hill that used to sing with orchard harvests. The auctioneer cleared his throat. Starting bid, $2,000. Do I hear 2,000? A long pause. People shuffled, coughed. A chair squeaked. Then a voice rang out from the far left of the room, clear, sharp, and feminine. 2,000. Rachel turned, and for a moment, she wasn't sure if the woman was real. She was dressed in an old-fashioned coat, the kind with thick buttons and a brooch at the collar, gray hair neatly pulled into a low bun, eyes sharp like cut glass. The room hushed as the auctioneer looked around. I have 2,000. Do I hear 25? Rachel's palms started sweating. She thought about Jake and Grace, her two kids, waiting at home with a reheated casserole and the sitcom reruns they always watched after school. She thought about the leak in the apartment ceiling that management still hadn't fixed. The way her youngest had asked, "Mommy, do we have a yard?" last summer. Her hand twitched in her lap. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. 2,500, the woman in the brooch said flatly. The room shifted. Someone mumbled, "She serious?" Rachel's heart was pounding now. That woman, who was she? And why was she bidding on Evergreen Hill? 2,500 going once. Rachel stood up. 28, she said, her voice thin. Heads turned. The auctioneer blinked. We have 2,800. Do I hear 3? The older woman didn't even flinch, but after a beat, she sat down. The silence was suffocating. 2,800 going once, going twice. Sold. The gavel slammed. Rachel's knees almost gave out. She had no idea what she'd just done. Her hands were trembling as she walked toward the front table. People whispered. A man with a clipboard asked for her ID and had her sign a form that said, "Final Sale." She signed with a hand that didn't feel like hers. Evergreen Hill was hers now, whatever that meant. As she turned to leave, she felt a soft tug at her coat. She turned. The woman in the brooch was standing just behind her. "I'm sorry," Rachel said quickly, still flushed. I didn't know you." But the woman simply smiled. "You didn't take anything from me, dear." "I don't understand." "You will," the woman said. Rachel furrowed her brow. "Do I know you?" The woman tilted her head. "Name's Evelyn Harper." Rachel blinked. The name rang odd, familiar in a way that brushed up against childhood memories she couldn't quite grasp. "You should go see it today," Evelyn added, stepping away. Before the weather turns. Rachel hesitated. Why did you stop bidding? Evelyn looked over her shoulder, voice quieter now. Because you need that land more than I need its ghosts. Before Rachel could respond, the woman turned and disappeared through the courthouse doors, leaving the scent of lavender and something older in her wake. Rachel stood frozen for a moment, the auction slip still clutched in her hand. Then she walked outside, into the crisp fall air, the weight of everything she'd done settling on her shoulders. She had bought a piece of land no one wanted, from a past no one spoke about, for a future she couldn't afford to gamble. But something deep in her gut, some ancient mother's instinct or stubborn Idaho will, whispered that she'd done the right thing. As she reached her beat-up Honda parked near the edge of the lot, she noticed Evelyn standing at a distance under the maple trees, watching. Their eyes met again. Evelyn smiled and said, barely audible over the wind, "You didn't buy a farm, Rachel. You just bought a story that hasn't been told yet." The morning air was thinner here, crisp, almost brittle, like the pages of an old book left too long in the sun. Rachel tightened her grip on the steering wheel as the truck bounced along the unpaved road, leading toward the shadowed rise where Evergreen Hill waited. Beside her, Grace leaned forward, nose practically pressed against the glass, her small fingers tracing imaginary lines on the foggy window. Noah sat silently in the back seat, earbuds in, but Rachel knew he wasn't listening to anything. He hadn't said a word since they passed the old rusted sign that read, Evergreen Hill, private property. It was their first real look at the place she now owned. And as the truck creaked to a stop at the overgrown gate, Rachel felt a sudden pinch of doubt. "Looks like nature won this round," she whispered. The weeds had climbed over the fence posts like silent invaders. Grass towered knee-high in some places. The gravel driveway had mostly vanished beneath a bed of moss and fallen pine needles. The farmhouse stood crooked against the gray sky, its roof a patchwork of collapsed beams and sunken shingles. Two broken shutters dangled beside a cloudy upstairs window, swaying gently in the wind like tired eyelids. "Mom," Noah said, pulling out one earbud, "are you sure this is the right place?" "Nope," Rachel said, forcing a smile, "but it's ours." They stepped out onto the drive. Rachel's boots sank slightly into the soft, damp earth. Grace skipped ahead with the sort of wild optimism only 9-year-olds could conjure in the face of ruin. "Look, there's a tree swing," she cried, pointing at a frayed rope that hung from a limb so thick it looked like it could hold a truck. Rachel reached into the truck bed for a crowbar and toolbox. The front door had been warped by weather and time, and it took 3 hard shoves before it groaned open, revealing a long hallway blanketed in dust. The smell inside was sharp and strange, like cedar, mildew, and something else, something old. She flicked the wall switch on impulse. The light came on. Rachel blinked. "What the hell?" Noah looked up. "How is there power?" Grace ran inside like she was entering a castle. "Maybe the ghosts pay the electric bill." They explored cautiously. The kitchen looked frozen in time, faded curtains over the window, a yellowed calendar on the fridge still turned to October 1982. Cups still sat in the drying rack. The air felt heavy, like the house had been holding its breath for decades. In the living room, Rachel pulled open a drawer of a small desk tucked beneath a window. Inside was a stack of yellowing receipts, some keys, a silver thimble, and a black and white photograph. A family of 5 stood in front of the house, 2 adults, 3 children, all dressed in Sunday best, stiff and solemn. On the back, in fading cursive, were the words, Evergreen Hill, last autumn, 1982. Rachel held the photo closer, squinting at the faces. None of them looked familiar. And yet, there was something oddly recognizable about the little girl standing far left, her hand gripping the hem of her mother's dress. "Mom, come look at the barn," Grace called. "Hang on, sweetheart," Rachel said absently. They spent the next few hours sweeping dust, airing out rooms, and hauling broken furniture onto the porch. Rachel scrubbed the kitchen sink until the porcelain gleamed white beneath the grime. She hadn't realized how badly she'd needed to feel useful again, to build something from scratch. This place was a disaster, sure, but it was hers. Late that afternoon, as the sun dipped lower, and the valley filled with long shadows. A knock came at the door. Rachel opened it to find a wiry man in his 50s, standing on the porch, hands in the pockets of a heavy denim jacket. He wore a stained ball cap low over his brow. "You the one who bought this place?" he asked. "I am. You've got guts, I'll give you that." "Meaning?" He looked past her, scanning the interior. "Folks around here don't go near Evergreen Hill, not since the Anders girl disappeared." Rachel frowned. "Disappeared?" He nodded. "Fall of '82. Same year the whole family up and vanished. Left their plates on the table, lights still on. Never found a trace of them." Rachel gripped the edge of the door tighter. "You watch yourself, ma'am. That place has got a habit of chewing up hope and spitting it back as regret." He turned and walked away, boots crunching against gravel that barely existed anymore. That night, Rachel sat on the porch swing, Grace curled beside her under an old quilt. Noah leaned against the railing, staring at the fields that stretched endlessly into the dark. "We can make this work," Rachel said softly. Noah didn't answer, but after a moment, he nodded once. The wind rustled through the apple trees behind the house. Dead limbs creaked like tired bones. She went inside to lock up. In the living room, she paused. The air had grown colder. Still. And something caught her eye. In the far corner, near the fireplace, one of the floorboards was slightly raised. The wood around it seemed worn, as though someone had once opened it often. She crouched down, tapping it lightly. Hollow. Just then, Noah's voice broke the silence. "Mom, come look at this." Rachel turned to find him standing at the edge of the room, pointing to something embedded in the wooden floor. A rusted padlock was fastened into an iron ring on a small hatch door. Noah's voice was barely above a whisper. "This thing, it's weird, right?" Rachel felt the air shift around her again, like the house was watching. The air inside the Morning Brew Cafe smelled like burnt coffee and cinnamon scones, a combination that somehow made Rachel feel both comforted and mildly on edge. The small-town diner hadn't changed in decades, from its red vinyl booths to the hand-painted locals-only sign that was only half joking. It was the kind of place where time moved slower, and secrets had a way of lingering in the corners, never quite fading. Rachel spotted Evelyn sitting alone at a booth near the back, her wide-brimmed felt hat resting beside a chipped mug of black coffee. The old woman's posture was impossibly straight, her fingers wrapped tightly around the cup, as if it were keeping her tethered to the present. People pretended not to stare, but the sideways glances and hushed whispers were as loud as any shout. Evelyn Harper might have been a ghost to most of Hope Hollow, but she hadn't lost her ability to make a room shift uncomfortably. "Sit down, dear," Evelyn said without looking up. "They'll stop staring once you become more interesting than I am. Might take a while." Rachel gave a half smile and slid into the booth. "Wasn't sure you'd show." "I told you, this place has its way of calling people back, like it or not." There was a pause, long enough for the server to refill Evelyn's coffee, and for Rachel to notice that no one had approached their table. It was as if an invisible barrier had formed around them. Evelyn waited until the waitress walked away before speaking again. "You're wondering why I pushed you to buy Evergreen Hill?" Rachel nodded. "It doesn't exactly feel like a lucky break." Evelyn pulled a worn leather pouch from her coat pocket and placed it gently on the table. Inside was a folded piece of parchment paper, yellowed with age and etched with intricate, hand-drawn lines. It looked like something pulled from an old trunk, not the kind of thing you expected to see in a place with fluorescent lighting and laminated menus. "This," Evelyn said, "is the original blueprint of the land. My grandfather drew it by hand in 1921. He called Evergreen Hill a garden waiting for its time." Rachel leaned in. "Why show me this?" Evelyn's eyes locked onto hers. "Because I believe you're the reason it's time." She opened the parchment fully, revealing a detailed layout of the farm, the main house, barns, orchards, and something that caught Rachel's eye immediately, a shaded square near the bottom labeled Vault. "I don't remember seeing that," Rachel said, pointing. "No one remembers what matters until it's too late," Evelyn replied softly. There was a weight in her voice that made Rachel's stomach tighten. She couldn't tell if Evelyn was being poetic or deadly serious. Probably both. You said you were once part of that land. Evelyn nodded. My mother was born there. I was raised in that house. But by the mid-'80s, everything went sideways. People stopped caring about roots. My family split over things I don't care to dredge up. I left, thinking I was done with it. Turns out, the land wasn't done with me. Rachel hesitated, then finally asked, "Why me? Why not just take it back yourself?" Evelyn reached into her bag again and pulled out a small, cloth-bound book. It was faded green with gold-embossed lettering so worn that Rachel couldn't make out the title. "This was meant to stay hidden until the right person came along," she said, sliding it across the table. "Open the first page." Rachel did. Her own name was written in flowing ink. Rachel Ann Madsen, March 15th, 2023, caretaker in time of renewal. She blinked. "Is this a joke?" "No," Evelyn said, voice steady. "That journal was passed down through the women in my family. My grandmother kept it, then my mother. I added to it before I left. Each entry is written with a name and a purpose. Yours is the first new name in over 40 years. Rachel ran her fingers over the page, her pulse quickening. "But I don't even know what I'm supposed to do." "You'll know when the time comes. The land remembers what it needs." A part of Rachel wanted to stand up and walk away. This was too much, too strange, too sudden. But another part of her, the part that had fought to hold her family together these past few years, felt something deeper stirring. Not fear, not confusion, something closer to responsibility. Rachel closed the book and looked up. "So what now?" Evelyn smiled for the first time. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it reached her eyes. "Now you start digging." That night, back at Evergreen Hill, Rachel sat on the porch steps with Grace leaning against her side and Noah flipping through the old blueprint under a porch light. "Mom," Noah said, tracing a square on the map with his finger, "what's this vault thing?" "I think it's an old storage area, maybe a cellar," Rachel replied, still holding the journal in her lap. Grace wrinkled her nose. "You think there's treasure?" Noah smirked. "Maybe bones." Rachel gave a dry laugh. "Let's hope it's neither." But as the night deepened and the kids went to bed, Rachel stayed awake. She flipped through the journal, page after page of elegant handwriting, detailing crop rotations, orchard plans, strange dreams, and warnings about keeping the soil clean. And then she reached the last page. The ink was smeared, as if written in haste. "If you're reading this, then the past has finally found its way home." Her hand trembled as she shut the journal. Outside, the wind stirred the dry leaves across the porch, whispering through the trees like voices from a time long buried. Rachel turned out the porch light and stepped inside, but her mind stayed behind, caught on a single thought, looping like a lullaby that wouldn't fade. The past has found its way home. But what if it wasn't just visiting? What if it never really left? By late morning, the sun had burned off the thin layer of frost, blanketing the roof of Evergreen Hill. Inside, Rachel was still in her paint-stained hoodie and old jeans, sleeves rolled, hair tied in a messy bun. She knelt on the scuffed living room floor, pulling a stubborn carpet corner loose, while Grace danced around with a feather duster she'd turned into a pretend sword. "Careful with that, sweetie," Rachel warned, brushing away clumps of dust that rose like ghosts from the boards beneath. "I'm a knight protecting the castle," Grace declared, swinging dramatically toward the fireplace. "We'll find treasure here, I just know it." Noah, quieter and more methodical, had taken to prying up cracked floorboards to check for mold. He was crouched near a corner of the room where the baseboard curved slightly inward, like the wall was subtly hiding something. His fingers traced along the seams. "Mama," he said, pausing, "this one's loose." Rachel scooted over to him, wiping sweat from her brow. He tapped the board. It gave a hollow sound. With a little effort and a borrowed crowbar, they pried it up. Dust poured from beneath the seam as the plank lifted, revealing a dark metal surface beneath. At first, Rachel thought it might just be a support beam. But as more boards came up, the shape became clear. A rounded metal handle, a dial with faded numbers, a circular brass faceplate dulled with time. "A safe?" Rachel whispered. "It's gotta be from, like, the 1940s. Noah said, crouching for a better look. The thing looked like it had been built into the floor itself, flush with the beams, embedded into concrete. There were 3 spinning dials on the front, and a heavy handle that refused to budge. Grace knelt beside them, wide-eyed. Is it treasure? Rachel smiled faintly. It could be empty, or it could just be old tax forms. Or a body, Grace said cheerfully. Rachel gave her a look. Let's not start a ghost story before dinner. She knelt and tried the dial. It squeaked with resistance, frozen by age. She tried the handle. No give. The metal was cold, even in the mid-afternoon light, like it hadn't been touched in decades. We could call someone to open it, Noah suggested. Rachel hesitated. They had barely enough money for groceries and basic repairs. No way she could afford a locksmith, especially for something that might be full of mothballs and disappointment. I'll figure something out, she murmured. That night, after the kids had gone to bed and the fire crackled quietly in the hearth, Rachel called Evelyn. The old woman answered after the 3rd ring, her voice raspier than usual. There's a safe in the floor, Rachel said without preamble. Silence. Under the living room, Rachel continued. Built-in, heavy, triple dial combo. You ever seen it before? I have, Evelyn said at last, but I never opened it. Do you know the combination? I don't. Rachel frowned. Can you help me open it? No. Why not? Evelyn's tone shifted, low and deliberate. Because there are things in this world that don't belong to just anyone. Some secrets choose when and to whom they reveal themselves. Rachel stared at the fire. That's cryptic. Evergreen Hill isn't just land, Evelyn said. It's a keeper of things, and it only gives them to those who are truly part of it. The line went dead. The next morning, Rachel stood over the safe with a mug of coffee, gone cold in her hand. Noah was already up, flipping through the old sketchbook Evelyn had given them. Grace sat cross-legged on the floor, tongue sticking out as she drew a new blueprint of the house with a set of colored pencils. What's this supposed to be? Rachel asked, looking over Grace's shoulder. This is the living room, Grace said, pointing to a lopsided square. And this is the weird floor where we found the metal thing. And this, she drew a swirly pattern above the safe, is the wall with the painting. Rachel blinked. Which painting? The old one that was there when we moved in. You said we should take it down because it gave you the creeps. Rachel glanced over at the hallway. The painting, an oil landscape of the property during winter with snow-covered trees and a barn in the distance, had been propped against the hallway wall after they removed it. The more she thought about it, the more she realized there was something peculiar about it. Not the image, but the background. 4 faint symbols painted into the snowbanks. Circles, a triangle, a line. Noah stood, peering over her shoulder. Wait, that might be something. He ran into the hallway, grabbed the painting, and leaned it up against the wall. Then he took Grace's sketch and laid it side by side. The shapes on the snowbanks, he said, tapping the corners. Look, there's 4 symbols, like numbers. Kinda, but also kinda not. Rachel narrowed her eyes. What if it's a code? Exactly, Noah said. The safe's dial needs 3 numbers, but what if the 4th shape is the order, or the key? Grace beamed. Told you it was treasure. Noah got to work, scribbling down permutations and combinations on a sheet of paper torn from the back of an old calendar. The numbers weren't exact, just symbolic, but one stood out, 19-4-82. Maybe it's a date, Rachel murmured. Like 1982? Noah asked. Evergreen Hill, last autumn, 1982, she said, remembering the faded handwriting on the back of the photograph they'd found in the drawer. Rachel knelt in front of the safe again. Her fingers trembled slightly as she turned the dial. 19-4-82. Then she gripped the handle and pulled. Nothing. She let out a slow breath. Okay, let's try backwards. She reset the dial. 82-4-19. The moment she twisted the handle, something clicked. It wasn't loud, just a tiny cash, like the exhale of an old man releasing a secret he'd held for decades. And then, silence. No wind, No creaking wood, no floor settling beneath them. The whole house held its breath. Rachel stared at the safe. Noah whispered, "Did it?" Rachel nodded slowly. "I think it's open." The air in the room turned still, heavy with something ancient and patient. Rachel rested her hand on the cold steel, but didn't lift the lid just yet. Behind her, the shadows stretched longer than they should have in the morning light, like something in the house had been waiting. And now it knew they were here. The click of the old safe still echoed in Rachel's chest as she knelt beside it, hands trembling slightly. Dust floated in the slanting sunlight of the living room, and for a moment, no one moved. The air felt heavier now, like the house had been holding its breath for decades, waiting for this moment. Inside the safe wasn't gold, or stacks of bills, or old guns like she might have expected in a place like this. It was paper, dozens of folded yellowed envelopes, tied together with twine so brittle it fell apart the moment Rachel touched it. On each envelope, a name had been written in faded brown ink that looked more like it had been soaked into the paper than written across it. Evelyn Harper. Noah knelt beside her, squinting. "That's the lady from the cafe, right?" Rachel nodded slowly, heart thumping. She turned over the bundle and found one envelope set apart, thicker, addressed differently, and sealed in red wax. This one didn't have Evelyn's name, it had hers, to the rightful heir of Evergreen Hill. E.H. Rachel swallowed hard, suddenly aware of the weight of the house pressing in around her. She opened it with shaking fingers. "Dear one, if you are reading this, then something I long believed impossible has come true. You've found the key. You've opened the door I had to close. You don't know me, and I don't know you. Not truly. But blood remembers. The land remembers. I had to leave this place behind before it swallowed me whole. But I never stopped believing that someone would return, someone who still had hope, who could see the beauty and the burden this land carries. If Evelyn is still there, trust her, but only so far. There are things she doesn't know, things no one does, not even me. Evergreen Hill is more than soil and timber. Beneath the surface is a secret that could feed nations, or ruin them. This isn't about fortune, it's about legacy and survival. In the other envelopes are letters I never sent, pages of research, journal entries, and regrets. I hope they help you make sense of what's coming. Under the bundle, you'll find a piece of what was torn away, what they tried to erase, South Hill Patch. Start there, but listen carefully, Rachel. Once you begin this, you won't be able to stop it, and not everyone wants the truth to come out. With whatever time I have left, I'll be watching and hoping. E.H. Rachel stared at the page, her name smudged where her thumb had pressed into the old ink. Noah and Grace sat beside her now, silent. Grace leaned her head against Rachel's shoulder, chewing on her sleeve like she always did when she was nervous. "Mom," Noah whispered, "what's South Hill Patch?" Rachel unfolded the bottom of the letter again, and sure enough, tucked behind the last page, was a scrap of paper, torn at the edges, hand-drawn in black pencil. It looked like a map, but not the one she had seen before. This one didn't match the current blueprint of Evergreen Hill. No GPS coordinates, no lot markers, just a few landmarks sketched in, a crooked tree, a rock shaped like a heart, a narrow stream, and in the bottom right corner, two words scribbled in the same hasty hand, South Hill Patch. She held it closer to the light. The paper was worn soft, almost fragile, and yet it felt like a thread, pulling her forward, drawing her towards something that had waited a very long time. That night, sleep didn't come easily. Rachel sat in the kitchen, the letter from Evelyn open on the table beside her. The kettle on the stove whistled, but she didn't move to pour the tea. Her eyes kept flicking to the window. The house felt different now, not just old, but aware, like it had woken up. Grace had gone to bed early, but Noah was still up, curled on the living room couch with a flashlight and one of the old letters he'd begged to read. She had let him choose one, on the condition he not scare his sister with any ghost stories. He was quiet now. So was the whole house. Too quiet. Rachel stood, stretching her stiff back, and padded barefoot across the kitchen to the sink. She reached for the curtains, intending to draw them shut, and froze. There, just beyond the window, a silhouette stood in the fog. Close. Closer than anyone should be. Not moving, not knocking, just standing. Her breath caught in her throat. The kettle whistled louder. The figure lifted a hand, slowly, and pressed something against the glass. A small, white square. Then, as if melting back into the mist, it stepped away and disappeared into the rolling fog. Rachel stood frozen for a full 10 seconds before she could move. When she did, she snatched the door open and stepped outside, heart pounding. But the yard was empty. No footsteps in the dew-soaked grass. No voices. No retreating shadow. Only a folded note stuck to the window with clear tape. She pulled it free with trembling fingers and unfolded it. 4 words, scribbled in thick black ink. Stop now, while you can. She backed slowly into the house and shut the door tight. Her pulse thudded loud in her ears as she locked the deadbolt and turned off the porch light. Rachel pressed her back against the wall, fingers clenched around the note. Outside, the mist rolled through the fields like a living thing, curling around fence posts and low brush like fingers reaching for the house. She stood there for a long time, just listening, waiting. But the silence didn't speak. Not yet. Rachel stood still, staring out the window as the fog thickened across the land. Her hand trembled as she clutched the warning. And just for a second, she thought she saw something, or someone, at the tree line. But when she blinked, it was gone. Only the mist remained, creeping across the field like a silent ghost in the night. The morning broke with a kind of silence that felt older than the hills. A low mist clung to the valley floor, like a secret unwilling to let go, curling around the posts of the dilapidated fence that marked the edge of Evergreen Hill. Rachel zipped up Grace's coat while Noah slung his backpack over one shoulder, holding tight to the folded piece of paper they'd carefully flattened out the night before, the torn fragment of a map they'd found inside the safe. Evelyn stood by her truck, sipping from a battered thermos. Her eyes, always half-shadowed under that weather-beaten straw hat, were fixed toward the south end of the property. South Hill Patch, she murmured, almost to herself. That's what my grandfather called it. Even back then, it didn't show up on official records. How is that even possible? Rachel asked, tightening her boots. You'd think a whole section of land would be hard to hide. Evelyn gave a small, knowing smile. You'd be surprised what gets forgotten on purpose. The 4 of them set out, crossing the brittle grass that crunched beneath their feet. It was nearly half a mile to the far edge of the property, past the barn, the broken fence line, and through a tangle of overgrowth that hadn't seen human care in decades. The trail, if you could call it that, was choked with fallen branches, blackberry thorns, and wild weeds. Grace trailed a few steps behind, picking up unusual leaves and acorns, storing them in the side pouch of her coat like a squirrel preparing for winter. They emerged into a clearing half-circled by a gentle slope, the hill rising up behind it like a natural amphitheater. At the center of the clearing were 6 gnarled apple trees, their limbs twisted and dark, their bark mottled like old parchment. Rachel stepped forward. The ground under her boots felt strangely spongy, alive somehow. The trees bore no leaves, but underfoot, dozens of apples littered the earth. They were small, hard as stones, yet none of them showed signs of rot. Not one. These shouldn't be here, Evelyn said, kneeling to pick one up. This time of year, and no insects? No birds picking at them? Noah crouched beside her, slipping on gloves before plucking one of the apples. I've never seen a specimen like this. It's almost waxy. Rachel watched her son closely. His expression was no longer that of a curious teen, but something sharper, focused, analytical. I want to run tests, he said, glancing at Evelyn, who simply nodded. They collected a half-dozen samples and started the long walk back. The mood was different now, less exploratory and more reverent. It was as if they'd stumbled into something sacred, something waiting. Later that day, Noah carefully packaged the apples and filled out the shipping forms to send them to the Agricultural Sciences Lab in Boise. Rachel helped where she could, but mostly just watched him, watched the way he triple-checked the labels, the steadiness of his hands. It was the most alive she'd seen him since the funeral. 2 days passed before the call came in. Noah answered on the second ring and immediately motioned for Rachel to pick up the other receiver in the kitchen. The voice on the line belonged to Dr. Wesley Chen, head of botany research at Boise State. His tone was calm, but beneath it buzzed a current of restrained awe. "We've never seen anything quite like this," he said. "The fruit's DNA contains an unknown hybrid signature. It's a triploid, meaning it can't reproduce through normal seeding, but what's remarkable is its resilience. These apples contain compounds that repel common pests naturally. They also show zero signs of fungal development." Rachel felt her knees weaken as she lowered into a kitchen chair. What does that mean?" Dr. Chen hesitated, then replied, "It means, Ms. Madsen, that you may be sitting on a genetic anomaly, a game changer for organic agriculture. Do you know the origin of the tree?" Rachel's eyes flicked to Evelyn, who sat silently at the table, her fingers laced around a teacup that had long gone cold. "It came with the land," Rachel said softly. That evening, they sat on the porch, watching the sky bleed from blue to orange as the sun dipped low behind the ridge. Grace played on the steps, humming to herself, while Noah scribbled notes from the call. Rachel looked over at Evelyn. "You knew about this, didn't you?" Evelyn didn't answer right away. She stared off toward the horizon, then said, "Not exactly. My grandfather used to say there was a reason no one wanted this land. People think it's because of what's buried beneath the ground. But really, it's about what's been forgotten." "What happens next?" Rachel asked. Evelyn turned to her with that same calm, unsettling clarity. "Now you understand why it was sold so cheap." They shared a silence that said more than words could. It was the kind of silence you only get when standing at the edge of something bigger than yourself. When night fell, they retired inside, locking up just like they always did. Doors bolted, curtains drawn. But as they returned from brushing teeth and tucking Grace into bed, something wasn't right. Rachel reached the bottom of the stairs and froze. The front door stood ajar, wide open. "I locked that," she whispered. "So did I," Noah said, his voice tight. Evelyn walked past them calmly, her hand slipping into her coat pocket. She flipped the light on. No broken windows, no footprints, no sound. But the door, the heavy wooden door with the antique latch, swung slightly on its hinges, as if it had been open for hours. Rachel stepped forward, one hand on the door handle, the other on her chest. The wind stirred outside, carrying with it a scent, apple blossoms. But the trees hadn't bloomed in years. She turned slowly to the others. "We were the only ones here, right?" Nobody answered. When they stepped onto the porch, the full moon revealed something they hadn't noticed before. Muddy footprints leading up to the door, but none leading away. It began with the wind. Rachel had always thought Evergreen Hill had a quiet kind of wind, the kind that rustled gently through the orchard leaves and slipped past the eaves of the farmhouse like a lullaby. But tonight, it wasn't gentle. Tonight, it whispered like someone breathing down her neck. She stepped onto the porch, barefoot, arms crossed tightly around herself. A heavy stillness pressed against her chest. The mist rising from the fields curled unnaturally along the fence posts. She could feel it, bone deep. Someone had been there. Maybe still was. 3 nights in a row, she'd heard footsteps, not the creaking of wood or the shifting of the house as it settled with age. Number. These were slow, deliberate steps, pausing, waiting, testing. And each morning, there were signs. Faint boot prints in the soft dirt near the barn, handprints on the fogged kitchen window, a single loose board on the side gate swinging open, though she remembered locking it. She hadn't told the kids. Grace was too young, still thrilled about sleeping in a new room with peeling wallpaper and a ceiling full of glow-in-the-dark stars. And Noah, he was too focused on the apples, too deep in soil samples and test tubes to notice his mother sleeping with a hammer under her pillow. But Rachel noticed. Every crack, every whisper, every breeze that didn't feel like wind. That morning, she walked the perimeter of the property, eyes scanning the tall grass, boots leaving her own trail in the dew. That's when she saw them, clear footprints heading from the woods to the barn, then disappearing behind the tool shed. They were fresh. The mud hadn't dried yet. She didn't say a word. Later that afternoon, as she scrubbed old rust off the barn latch, she heard the unmistakable crunch of tires on gravel. Her chest tightened. A silver sedan slid down the driveway. Clean, unbelievably clean, as if it had never seen a dirt road before. The tinted windows reflected the cloudy sky like a mirror. Rachel stood upright, wiping her hands on her jeans. The engine died, and a tall man stepped out. Crisp gray suit, leather shoes, a face that was forgettable in the way dangerous people often are, plain, smooth, like it had been wiped clean of anything human. "Ms. Madsen?" She nodded slowly. "Jonas Greaves, Paragon Biodevelopment. I believe we have something to discuss." He didn't wait for an invitation, walked straight up to her with the confidence of a man who never heard the word no. "What is it you want?" she asked, voice firm. "We're prepared to make an offer on Evergreen Hill, substantial, well above market." He handed her a document, neatly folded. Rachel unfolded it and stared. $300,000, 5 times what she paid. "I'm not selling," she said immediately. Jonas tilted his head, still smiling. "Why not?" "It's an old property, remote, falling apart. Doesn't seem like the kind of place a single mother should be staking her future on." "That's exactly why I'm staying," she snapped, "because it's mine." "You think you understand what you're standing on, Ms. Madsen, but you don't. This place has roots deeper than you can imagine." Rachel folded the offer and handed it back. "Still not selling." Jonas stepped closer. His eyes lost the false warmth. "You should be careful what you dig up. The past doesn't like to be disturbed." She stared him down, jaw set. "Is that a threat?" He didn't answer, just smiled again and returned to his car. That night, she sat with Evelyn on the porch, silence heavy between them. "He came," Rachel said. "I figured he might." "You knew him." Evelyn nodded, gaze fixed on the distance. "Jonas Greaves. He worked with my father, helped develop the Phoenix strain, smart, persuasive, until he tried to steal the entire project. My father shut everything down, erased every trace. Or so we thought." "Why come back now?" "Because he knows what's still here, because he never stopped looking, and now he knows you found it." Rachel looked down at her hands. "He knew about the apples, about the research. We never published anything." Evelyn's face hardened. "Then someone's watching." The next day, Noah came running into the kitchen, face pale. "Mom, the attic window's open." "You left it open?" "I never opened it," he said, voice trembling. "And someone went through my notebooks." Rachel felt the walls closing in. She changed every lock on the house, installed latches on every window, slept with her bedroom light on, but nothing stopped the feeling. They were being watched. That evening, Rachel found something on the porch swing, a small object glinting faintly in the dying light. She picked it up, her locket, silver, oval-shaped, belonged to her mother. She had locked it in the top drawer of her bedroom dresser. That drawer was still locked. She looked out at the fields. The mist had come early, thick, low, rolling over the grass like fog off a lake. And then she saw it, a figure, near the edge of the trees, just standing, unmoving, watching. Rachel stepped forward instinctively, but the figure vanished, swallowed by mist. She didn't scream, didn't cry. She just locked the door and kept the locket in her fist all night. Rachel held the locket tightly, the silver cool against her skin, her eyes fixed on the place where the figure had been. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, but to her, they whispered something far colder. Whoever had been watching them, they weren't done yet, and they weren't going away. It wasn't the email that startled Noah awake. It was the silence that came before it. A hush had settled over the farmhouse, the kind of eerie quiet that makes you feel like someone is listening on the other end. He rubbed the sleep from his eyes and glanced over at the tablet glowing beside his bed. The subject line hit him like a shot of cold water. Genetic results, South Hill sample. He blinked at the screen. DNA match confirmed with patent 49823A, 1981. Cultivar designation, Phoenix. Registered applicant, Elijah Harper, E. Harper. It felt like the air had been sucked from the room. "Grace," he whispered, but his sister was still tangled in sleep, her face buried beneath her blanket. Noah didn't wait. He scrambled down the stairs 2 at a time, tablet clenched in his hand like a live wire. He found Rachel in the kitchen, pouring herself a cup of weak coffee. Evelyn sat at the table, already dressed, flipping through a yellowed ledger, with the kind of calm only a woman accustomed to decades of secrets could manage. "You're going to want to see this," Noah said breathlessly, sliding the tablet between them. Evelyn's hand froze mid-turn. Rachel leaned in. As they read, a silence fell between them that hummed louder than any word. "So it's real," Rachel murmured. "Not just real," Evelyn replied. Her voice, though quiet, carried the weight of long-buried truth. It was never supposed to see daylight again. She sat back, sighing as if she'd been waiting years to exhale. "My grandfather, Elijah, was one of the finest botanists I've ever known. Grew up chasing the science of resilience. He believed plants were the answer to survival. In '72, after a brutal drought and a series of crop failures, he began something radical. He wanted to create the ultimate fruit, a species that needed no chemical support, could withstand the elements, and keep for weeks without rotting. He called it Phoenix." Evelyn's eyes drifted toward the orchard through the window. "He said it wasn't just for farmers, it was for humanity." "But why hide it?" Rachel asked. "Why let it vanish?" "Because Jonas Greaves got involved." The name fell like a curse. Noah instinctively straightened up. "He was charming, ambitious, and he knew how to steal without leaving fingerprints," Evelyn continued. "He was Elijah's lab assistant, barely out of grad school. At first, everyone thought he was brilliant, but brilliance without morals is just manipulation. Jonas made copies of Elijah's genetic work, claimed he could help commercialize it, turn it into something profitable. When Elijah refused, Jonas filed his own secret patent draft and tried to claim the seed for himself." "What happened?" Evelyn took a breath. 1 week later, the lab was raided. The patent was pulled, all research confiscated under some vague federal order. Elijah disappeared not long after. They said he fled, maybe even lost his mind. I never believed it. Noah stared at the tablet again. "But the Phoenix survived." Rachel stood, suddenly restless, like the floor beneath her had begun to shift. "We need to see what else he left behind." The storage shed behind the barn was a forgotten corner of the property. Rust streaked the lock, and ivy had crept through the window slats like fingers trying to claw their way inside. It took Rachel nearly an hour to clear the boxes, dig past the broken furniture, and pry open a rotting cabinet bolted to the back wall. She found it there, a trunk of oak and iron, stamped with the initials E.H. The hinges groaned as she cracked it open. Inside were leather-bound journals, dozens of them, handwritten entries, meticulous and exact. Botanical sketches, Latin species names, tables of data, all of it capturing the evolution of a single strain. And then came a final journal, the cover more worn, the pages hurried. March 3rd, 1981. J.G. entered the cold vault again. I confronted him. He smiled like it was already his. He said no one would remember me, that the patent would be his, and the fruit would belong to Paragon. "I've hidden the true seeds beneath the oldest tree in South Hill. If you found this, then maybe you're the one meant to finish the work. Just know this, Jonas is not who he seems." Rachel stared at the words, heart thudding. Not just a thief, not just a corporate vulture. Jonas had tried to erase Elijah and claim the Phoenix legacy as his own. That night, the farm changed. It wasn't the wind or the way the trees whispered in the orchard. It was something colder, something watchful. Rachel sat alone in the living room, Evelyn asleep in the guest room, the kids upstairs. She thumbed through one of Elijah's diagrams when the floor creaked behind her. She turned. No one was there. She walked to the window and froze. A black pickup sat outside the gate. No license plate, just the low hum of an engine. In the cab, the outline of 2 figures, one in the passenger seat, holding what looked unmistakably like a long-lens camera, pointed directly at the house. She killed the light. Noah crept down the stairs moments later, clutching a crinkled photo. "I found this between the journal pages," he said, voice low. It's from 1982. He held it up. 6 men stood in a lab, mid-laugh, mid-conversation. But one face stole all the attention. Jonas. Identical. Same age, same stare, same half-smile. Rachel felt the blood drain from her face. That photo's over 40 years old, she whispered. I know, Noah replied, but it's him. Exactly the same. Behind them, the headlights cut out. The truck was gone. Rachel clutched the photograph, heart racing. No one stays the same for 40 years, she whispered. Noah stepped closer to the window, his voice dry with disbelief. Unless they were never meant to in the first place. Out in the orchard, something moved just beyond the trees, watching, waiting. And whatever it was, it had never left. The morning air at Evergreen Hill was unusually still, as if the land itself was holding its breath. Rachel stood at the kitchen sink, the coffee in her mug long gone cold, while her eyes scanned the empty gravel path outside. Since the black pickup truck incident, sleep had been a luxury. She'd heard it again last night, the engine idling just past the tree line, the low mechanical hum too steady to be wind. It was time to do something. She grabbed the folder she'd been compiling for days, genetic reports from the lab in Boise, copies of Elijah Harper's journal, photos of the Phoenix apples, and a timeline of every strange encounter since moving in. She drove straight into Hope Hollow and walked into the mayor's office without an appointment. Mayor Grant Holloway looked up from behind a desk cluttered with paperwork and a mug that said, "Best Grandpa Ever." He gave a half smile. "Ms. Madsen, you're either here to report a miracle or a mess." "Depends how you look at it," she replied, dropping the folder onto his desk. He thumbed through the pages slowly, his eyebrows raised at the DNA results, furrowed at the photo of Jonas Greaves, and finally settled into a skeptical squint. "This is intriguing, but not actionable." Rachel frowned. "Not actionable. Jonas Greaves is stalking my property. He threatened me in front of my kids. Do you have that on record? A police report? Audio? Video? Number?" "But I have this." She pointed to the files. "This is real, and if you don't act, he's going to bury it again, just like he did in the 80s. The mayor sighed. "Look, Rachel, you're asking me to go to war with a biotech firm over old papers and unverified claims. I need more." She left with her fists clenched and her eyes burning. Back at the farm, Evelyn was waiting on the porch, sipping chamomile tea from a chipped mason jar. Rachel told her everything. Evelyn nodded once. "Then we bring the mountain to Moses." That evening, they began calling in every favor, every old friend, every name Evelyn had scribbled in her worn address book over the years. Word spread like wildfire. By the end of the week, an impromptu town hall was set for Saturday night at Evergreen Hill. The air was crisp when the first neighbors arrived. Noah had strung up bare bulbs between the barn and the oak tree, casting warm halos of light over a growing sea of folding chairs. Some folks brought lanterns, others brought old stories and older suspicions. By 8 p.m., there were over 50 people gathered beneath the stars. Rachel stepped onto the makeshift stage, an overturned hay bale covered with a worn quilt, with a flashlight in one hand and Elijah's journal in the other. She took a breath that trembled in her chest and began. "I didn't come here to start trouble," she said. "I came here to start over. I bought this place because I thought it was forgotten. But it wasn't. Not really. It was waiting." She held up the journal. "This belonged to Elijah Harper. Some of you knew him. Some of you worked with him. He wasn't just a farmer. He was a scientist, a dreamer, and maybe the last man in this valley who believed food should serve people, not power." She paused. The crowd was still. Someone tried to erase him, to bury this land, to buy silence. That someone is back. And he's not just after apples. He's after everything this place stands for. From the shadows, a man stood up. "I remember Elijah," he said. His voice was gravelly but clear. "Worked with him 2 summers. Taught me how to graft limbs by hand. That Greaves fella, he was trouble then. Slick. Didn't care about the work, just the payoff." Nods followed, a few murmurs of agreement. Then headlights sliced through the night. The crowd turned as a black SUV rolled in and parked with calculated arrogance. Jonas Greaves stepped out, smooth as ever, in a wool coat that cost more than most monthly mortgages. He walked straight toward the gathering. "Evening," he said. "Didn't realize we were hosting a bonfire of conspiracy theories." Rachel stepped down from the hay bale. "This is a private meeting." "And yet, here I am," he smiled, gaze sweeping over the crowd. Then he spotted Noah, standing beside the barn, phone raised. "Recording again, are we?" "Careful, son. That live button can get you into trouble." "Not as much trouble as hiding the truth," Noah replied. Jonas's eyes narrowed. His smile vanished. "You're meddling with things beyond your understanding. These trees, that journal, none of it belongs to you. It was never finalized, never protected. What you're doing is illegal." Rachel held his stare. "You know what's illegal? Stealing research, threatening families, standing here pretending you still have a right to claim any part of this." She held up a page from Elijah's journal. "You were named, you were warned, and now the whole world gets to see you for what you are." The crowd was quiet, but something shifted. The weight of the moment turned. Jonas looked at them all. These farmers, mechanics, retired teachers, people he'd underestimated. He turned on his heel. "This isn't over," he muttered. "You're right," Rachel said. "It's just beginning." By the next morning, Noah's live stream had crossed 200,000 views. Hashtags trended. Regional outlets picked up the story. Journalists called. Emails poured in. Someone even claimed to have documents linking Jonas to a failed acquisition scandal in another state. Suddenly, the shadows weren't safe for him anymore. Late that night, as Rachel tucked Grace into bed, her phone rang. Blocked number. She hesitated, then answered. A low voice, distorted but cold, said, "They're coming. And this time, they don't just want the apples." Rachel froze. In the silence that followed, a dog barked somewhere beyond the orchard. The wind shifted, bringing with it the faintest rustle of movement in the trees. Something unseen had just crossed a line, and it wasn't going back. The frost had lifted early that spring. Morning sun melted the thin layer of ice clinging to the apple blossoms, leaving beads of water glittering like glass along every petal. Rachel stood at the edge of the orchard, boots half buried in the damp soil, and let the scent of new life wash over her. The air was different now, lighter, as though the land itself had taken its first real breath in decades. What began as a reluctant purchase with a pocket of savings had grown into something she couldn't have imagined, a reckoning, a revival, and maybe, if she dared to hope, a second chance. After the storm of attention, things happened fast. Too fast to process in real time. News vans showed up with satellite dishes, reporters hungry for a rural David versus Goliath story. Rachel declined most interviews. She hadn't fought this battle for airtime, but others took notice. The state's Department of Agricultural Heritage sent a full team to Evergreen Hill, combing the property with clipboards, cameras, and quiet reverence. What they uncovered, thanks to the journals, the genetic reports, and Noah's relentless documentation, was enough to spark headlines across the region. The Phoenix apple wasn't just real. It was biologically unprecedented, a fruit that resisted rot, pests, and even mild droughts. More than that, it carried within it a philosophy long forgotten by modern agriculture: sustainability without exploitation. Within 3 weeks, Evergreen Hill was officially designated a state botanical heritage site. They handed Rachel a plaque. She handed them Elijah's journal. But it wasn't a trade, it was a promise. Jonas Greaves didn't go quietly. There were lawyers, statements, a press release full of veiled denial. But the damage was done. The footage from that night, his threats, his presence, the surveillance, had gone viral. A tech blog uncovered his attempts to file patents under multiple aliases. One investigative piece even suggested that Jonas had been involved in corporate espionage for decades, aging mysteriously slowly, always slipping through the cracks of paper trails and prosecutions. Eventually, charges stuck: unauthorized surveillance, fraudulent data claims, violation of ethical research protocols. Nothing that landed him behind bars forever, but enough to bury his reputation. He disappeared after that. Some said he fled overseas. Others whispered he was still watching, somewhere in the shadows. But Rachel refused to let fear take root again, not in this soil. One crisp morning, Evelyn met her at the orchard's edge, holding a brass key in her hand. "This belonged to Elijah," she said. "It opens the old root cellar down the southern slope, the lab he used to work in, before it all fell apart." Rachel took it gently. "You're sure?" Evelyn smiled, lines deepening around her eyes. "It was never mine to keep. It waited for someone stubborn enough to stay." The cellar was half swallowed by wild grass and a collapsed fence. But once the door groaned open, a flood of scent, damp earth, dried cedar, faint citrus, wrapped around her like a memory. Inside were jars of seeds, handwritten notes pinned to corkboards, and an old lantern still sitting on the table, its wick dry but intact. She lit it, and something inside her shifted. That space became her sanctuary, a place where old knowledge and new intention could meet, where she could write, experiment, dream without interference. It was never about saving the farm anymore. It was about preserving the story. Noah took to the role of resident researcher with the ease of someone finally standing in the right light. Boise's Community Science Initiative sent a formal invitation for him to co-author an educational program around ethical seed preservation. He accepted with a quiet nod and spent the next 2 weeks assembling a miniature lab in the back room of the cottage. Grace, ever the explorer, had claimed a corner of the orchard as her own. She cleared it with her bare hands and a child's determination, planting herbs and flowers following the diagrams she found hidden in Elijah's journals: lavender for calm, chamomile for sleep, calendula for healing. "This place should feel alive," she said one day, brushing dirt from her knees. "Not like a museum." Rachel watched her daughter work and wondered if Elijah would have smiled at that. Maybe he already had. Weeks bled into months. Rachel no longer flinched when the phone rang, no longer scanned the tree line for dark figures. Life, once so fragile, began to root itself. People came to visit, not crowds, just enough. Curious minds, old farmers, graduate students. They listened, walked the orchard paths, touched the bark of the trees like it could tell them something. Some stayed to help for a while. Some simply sat and listened to Evelyn tell stories over iced tea. The land had stopped being just a property. It had become a place of memory, of hope. On the anniversary of their arrival, 1 year since that autumn auction, Rachel organized a gathering. Tables were set beneath the largest phoenix tree. Lanterns hung from branches. Homemade food filled mismatched platters. The air buzzed with laughter, stories, and the warmth of people who had decided to believe in something bigger than themselves. Toward the end of the evening, Rachel stood, glass in hand. "A year ago," she began, "this place was broken. So was I. I thought maybe, just maybe, if I planted myself here long enough, something would grow." She paused, heart in her throat. "I never imagined it would be this. Not just trees, not just survival, but people, stories, a future." Silence, then applause. And as night fell and the orchard hummed with life, she walked to the top of the hill one last time. Wind kissed her face. The trees swayed gently, and across the field, just beyond the fence line, stood a figure. Evelyn. She smiled, eyes soft, hands folded in front of her, then turned, and slowly disappeared into the trees. Rachel didn't call out, didn't chase. She just stood still, watching. A single blossom drifted from the branch above, landing in the palm of her hand. She closed her fingers around it, held it to her chest, and breathed deep. The orchard had chosen her, and now, finally, she chose it back. By now, you've walked with Rachel through every cracked floorboard and forgotten hallway of Evergreen Hill. You've heard the whispers behind the orchard trees, felt the weight of long-buried secrets, and watched her children go from uncertain strangers in a new land to protectors of a legacy once thought lost. But if there's one thing this story reminds us, it's that sometimes the land chooses you long before you ever choose it. Rachel didn't set out to become a hero. She was just a mother with 2 kids, a tired heart, and a desperate dream to give them something more than 4 walls and a leaky ceiling. What she bought that day at the county auction wasn't just land. It was memory. It was mystery. It was a test of will, and perhaps most of all, a call to purpose. She could have given up. When the roof collapsed, when the safe refused to open, when Jonas Greaves showed up with his smug smile and bloodless threats. She could have packed up the kids and run when the shadows grew too long and the past knocked on her door with a warning note in hand. But she stayed. Not because she had all the answers, but because she was tired of running. And when someone plants themselves in truth, the roots grow fast. The safe revealed more than secrets. It uncovered generations of resistance, of love wrapped in science, of hope pressed between the pages of a journal. The Phoenix apple wasn't just some miracle fruit. It was a statement, a reminder that not everything needs to be tampered with or trademarked. That sometimes the best things are born out of patience, quiet, and care. And maybe that's the real story of Evergreen Hill. Not the corporate sabotage, not the patent fraud, not even the mysterious figure in the woods that might never be fully explained. The real story is about a woman who said no to fear, who stood her ground when it would have been easier to sell out, who chose legacy over luxury, truth over convenience. Now, Evergreen Hill isn't just a farm, it's a sanctuary, a living promise that what was once broken can be mended, that forgotten land can bloom again, and that maybe, just maybe, the stories we leave behind matter more than the ones we inherit. And if you've made it this far, if you felt the tug of this tale in your chest like a string tied to something you almost forgot you believed in, then maybe this story wasn't just meant for Rachel. Maybe it was meant for you too. So now I have to ask, what would you have done if you found that envelope? Would you have opened the safe, ignored the warnings, fought to protect the orchard, even when it meant making enemies far more powerful than yourself? Let us know in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you believe that some stories deserve to be told, not for fame, not for fortune, but because they shine a light on the quiet courage it takes to start over, then hit that subscribe button. It helps us bring more stories like this to life. Stories of ordinary people standing against extraordinary odds. Stories buried in dirt and dust and truth. Because out there, in the forgotten corners of America, there are still old barns with secrets in the rafters. Still pastures that remember every footstep. Still families stitching their futures together with nothing but grit and grace. And we'll be there to tell those stories, one porch light, one rusty gate, one brave soul at a time. This was Evergreen Hill. This was Rachel's story. And next week, we'll take you to a different farm, a different family, a different secret waiting just beneath the surface. Until then, stay curious, stay brave, and never underestimate the power of a key in the right hands. We'll see you in the next story.